Salam, hello, bonjour for our French speakers. Since we're in Canada, or at least I'm in Canada, I'm Adnan Husain, host of this channel and podcast. And I want to welcome you all. It's a new venture and a new effort. Many of you may know me as co-host of Guerrilla History. I'm a professor of medieval Mediterranean and Islamic world history at Queen's University. And I've also been a host of the Majlis podcast, but I've decided to take my efforts to discuss the Middle East, Islamic world, Muslim diasporic culture and politics, and other kinds of things that I'm interested in about the region, about history, about politics, and maybe even things like music and culture off the university campus and privately, individually on this new channel. So I really want to welcome you and hope that you will share it and support it and tell your friends about it if you've enjoyed content that I've produced either as a host or a guest in the past. I think you'll find this channel interesting. And I also hope to do some things on Islam and Muslim religion, what I would characterize maybe as Muslim liberation theology, that is, Islam understood for a liberatory and emancipatory movement. And so you might find any or all of this of interest. So please do share, like, and support this. But today, I think there's a topic that's very pressing and that's very relevant to the concerns of this channel and of my interest, both in history and in contemporary politics. And I was very lucky that through the network of friends, colleagues, and comrades that I've been enjoying over the last several years, that a friend and brother, Mehmet Ali Arslan from Sweden, with whom I've done an interview and we've had a lot of correspondence, sent me an interesting correspondence historically that was published in Turkish online and in media. And so I thought this was a fascinating subject. It is a letter that is translated into Turkish, but a letter that purports to be a missive sent by Sultan Selim in 1514, or at least sometime before the very famous Battle of Chaldiran, to his opponent in that war, in that battle, Shah Isma'il of Persia. So we have the Ottoman Sultan writing to the Shah of the Persian world, of Persia. And this was circulated in the context of contemporary situation and politics. And this was sent to me by Mehmet Ali. He thought this was interesting, and I agreed with him. This is really fascinating and something that needs to be discussed. So I want to welcome you, Mehmet. First, thank you for sending that to me and proposing that we discuss this. And second, for being a guest on this show in its early stages. So welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
It's our honor. But why don't you tell listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, of course. And again, it's an honor to be here, especially in the early stages of this fantastic journey. I'm really glad at the intro you gave. I'm super excited. It's going to be a lot of fun following you, inshallah. And I love the Islamic liberation theology. That sounds great. Really,
it's needed.
To it.
We need it.
It's definitely needed. It's definitely needed. So who am I? Why am I here? I don't really know why am I here. I have, as a disclaimer, I have no expertise in anything. But like my original suggestion for participation was to be the dumb one asking you questions so that you can explain things. I'm really honored that you wanted to actually discuss things with me. So, well, I guess to begin with, I'm Kurdish from Turkey. I've been living in Sweden for the last 15 years. I am a practicing Muslim, trying to be a person of faith. It's like in the core. I'm trying to put it at the core of my life. I am a programmer by trade, a musician, and an activist at heart, I'd say. yeah, I mean, I'm closing into for my 40s, and I've been following international politics for the last 20 years, on and off. Like, but since the Al-Aqsa flood started, I've been like this. This has been my day, night, as for most of us who care.
Yes, yes.
So, and I tried to find an organization that suits me as well, and I did find one, at least for a while, which was the organization we did an interview with you, which was
Hmm.
great. You should definitely go check it out. It was about um, what did we name it?
Something with the Crusades in the
Yeah,
title, I think.
it was
Yeah.
definitely about crusades, but it was de-weaponizing history. I think it was
Right,
something like
which
that.
is a theme that we're coming back to, which is,
Exactly.
we've been having these
Yeah.
discussions about both exploring and studying history, but also the way in which it's being used, abused, marshaled to mobilize certain kinds of identities and contemporary politics. So the theme that we're discussing today really follows from conversations we've been having for a while. What was the name of
The
uh,
organization.
yes, yeah.
We are called, or they are called, European Palestinian Youth Union. It's a long name, but it's EPYU, EPYU.
Right. And it's a little bit like Palestine Youth Movement in North America,
Yeah, exactly.
Palestine Solidarity Organization,
Yeah,
that sort of
there
thing.
are quite many of them in Sweden
Yeah.
actually, but they're
Hmm.
all, as we will talk about
Yeah.
probably, we're all splintered.
Maybe.
I mean, it's the the factionalism, unfortunately, is very much part of the Palestinian Solidarity movement, and
Well, I mean, that's right.
the reason I left was that we had a disagreement about the events in Syria. They wanted to publish a congratulatory letter, and I'm like, that's where I jump off.
You
I'm
didn't
sorry.
feel so congratulatory about it. Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I
not. I
mean,
mean, we had good discussions, and I think we understand each other, but we don't agree. And what I see is in the future we're going to have more of these, unfortunately, and not less. So
right. Well, I think that's getting us into the subject that we'll want to be discussing. Maybe not right at the outset, but we should say that one of the contexts for really for this episode, for this discussion, is precisely to think about the context of what's happened in and to Syria and what some of the consequences of that are, have been, will be on the region, for the people of Syria, for the broader Middle East, but also on the solidarity movement for Palestine, because it seemed for a period of time that there was great unanimity, at least among the peoples of the Middle East, Islamic world, and people of conscience across the West, against their government's complicity in the genocide taking place in Gaza. And so there was a kind of, even though, of course, nobody in power was listening, there was at least a culture of resistance that was being formed through people's, activist, willingness to stand up against terrible crimes against humanity. And that was a form of unity that was very powerful in its own way, even if it didn't have so many immediate, tangible effects. And I think it did cause a lot of panic in certain quarters of the political elite and establishment in the West, and so on. But the other component that I think was important over the last almost 16 months now, since October 7th, 2023, is that there was also a politicization and activation of feelings of solidarity of Muslims as an ummah, which is very interesting. There are very few things that have activated that. And the situation in Syria has been one of the key devices in fragmenting that. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But before we, really explore that, maybe we should turn to this letter and thinking about why it was published during this time, because it fits exactly into this sectarian division and fragmenting of that kind of unity. So this is a letter by Sultan Selim. Maybe you could take us through it a little bit, summarize it, and maybe there are some key passages we could focus on just so people know. This is a letter that was published. You tell us where it was published.
Yeah, I can, because I think it's important. So it was published a couple days after the revolution. I did an air quotes for people listening. But the person that published this on his Twitter is a columnist from Turkey who is very close to the government. He has 300,000 followers on Twitter, and he's been to Aleppo right after, like had pictures, whatever. He published this without any comment, just saying, "Oh, this is the letter that Yavuz Selim sent Shah Isma'il of the Safavids before the Chaldan War." And the letter itself, it's not long, it's not sourced, so I don't think it's authentic, because I tried to find like the letters, and we did find some letters, but they don't have this content. It's quite like what Martin Nasrallah would call takfiri in its nature, because it's like, I don't want to go through the whole thing because there are a lot of terminology that people wouldn't probably understand.
Well, speaking of, you use the word takfiri. Perhaps we should, at least sure, for people who don't know that phrasing and why it has been common among the axis of resistance and their supporters and allies to brand some of the affiliates of jihadist groups or of extreme Salafist or Wahhabi movements and ideology. These are, kinds of orientations within Sunni Islamic law and theology that embrace a very literalist, narrow, so-called reformist kind of. They're like, you have to think of them maybe as like the originalists when it comes to U.S. constitutional doctrine. Is like, oh, we want to go back to what the original text means without a lot of interpretation, supposedly, and yet their vision of that original condition is not very sophisticated, but it is very strict.
Yeah, it's very
and they are very exclusive. I think that's a very important word. And as a result, they find themselves very comfortable in pronouncing other people who identify as Muslims, who practice as Muslims, as non-believers or infidels. And so the act of declaring someone else who thinks of themselves and identifies as a Muslim as a non-Muslim is called takfir. So it's because that is a very characteristic practice of theirs, this exclusionist practice. They're called takfiris often. Yeah.
I don't know if the term was used before, but where I saw it first was from Nasrallah's speech in 2013, yes, when he was explaining why they will have to intervene in Syria.
Right. Well, pronouncing somebody a non-Muslim has been known as takfir, but to give that appellation as the way to characterize these groups may have been something more recent that Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, rahmatullah, used. But so, at any rate, I didn't want to interrupt too much. But speaking of terminology,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I use it because I don't want to use the word jihadist, because I think it's a misnomer, or like misuse of the word jihad, as you know.
That's right.
Like, because Hezbollah would call themselves jihadis as well. Hamas would call themselves jihadis, because jihad is just the righteous struggle, more or less.
Struggle, right.
So
exactly.
That's why I don't want to use that word.
I agree with you, and I did use it because I was trying to explain with other words who they are, but that's exactly the case, is that they have also misused and misappropriated the tradition and arrogated it to themselves. Yeah.
The word jihad isn't in English, so I'm like, it's imported, so why don't we import the other word, which is better?
That's right. That's right.
But anyway, the letter itself, the part I'd like to read out is, I think, the most inflammatory part. It says, he sort of lists, Yavuz Selim lists the sins of Shah Ismail, and says, because of these and similar actions that are on everyone's lips, the scholars have unanimously decided, based on definitive evidence, that your disbelief is certain and you are to be excommunicated, that you and those who follow you should be killed, that your wealth and sustenance should be plundered, and your women and children should be enslaved. So that's an interesting recipe that has unfortunately been activated before in Syria and elsewhere. This columnist publishes this letter without any comment, but obviously in the Syria context. And then it, of course, triggers thoughts of, okay, we're now in a phase, instead of fighting Zionism as a unified ummah, we are in a phase where we should prioritize the sectarian conflicts, or the sectarian conflict. I mean, of course, he's signaling, oh, Iran, now you lost in Syria, we're coming for you. And unfortunately, that sentiment is active in Turkey. That's I think 2-3 weeks before that, maybe a bit earlier, the national broadcasting companies, the state company, the chief of the company in a forum said, "Oh, we're starting publishing in a Farsi channel now. Like they are creating a new Farsi channel." And he said something like, "Oh, we have to disturb Iran." Like, why? Why do you have to disturb Iran in the middle of a fight against Zionism? Like, what are you doing? But then, like, it follows a certain logic that is that has big purchase within the government ranks, I'd say, and its base.
Well, that's interesting that you would signal it as immediately an anti-Iran kind of message, and expressing hostility in governing circles, and at least in the political elite and in the official media of the government. I want to ask you a little bit more about relations with Iran and how those have been characterized and portrayed in Turkey in the recent past, coming into this moment. But I also had the thought at the time that the letter clearly was meant to also justify Turkey's intervention itself in Syria by sponsoring these various Takfiri groups, these militias, and that are recruited, that while they might have some sort of Syrian representation in them, are clearly also very much dependent upon foreign, internationalist fighters coming from different parts of Central Asia or the Caucasus and other Arab countries and lands, where they've made a kind of Takfiri international, and that have been sponsored, supported, provided training and so on by the Turkish military and intelligence, as well as, of course, the United States, as well as funding from Gulf countries, particularly Qatar, I think, in this case, and that their target has been, as it has been, of U.S. policy of interference in Syria by arming and promoting a military orientation to Syrian opposition to the government of Syria under Bashar al-Assad. And that Bashar al-Assad, of course, as his father, Hafiz al-Assad, built a base of support to some extent in co-confessionalists of the Alawi. Well, let's be clear, it's Alawi because we're talking about the Arabs, the Alawi orientation, which is, for people who don't know, is a particular, form of Shi'i belief and practice that has a long history and emerged, it seems, sometime in the 9th century of the Common Era, 9th, 10th century of the Common Era, as a strand from among the line of the Shi'i imams that were recognized and would later become the more dominant form of Shi'ism that we see present today, practiced in southern Lebanon, in Iran, and many other places. So the vast majority of those who adhere to this Shi'i orientation are known as Twelver or Imami Shi'is, because they recognize and acknowledge 12 divinely kind of inspired or legitimate religious and political leaders, basically, who descend from the family of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him. And this is one group that came to establish itself through some dissent or difference in choosing who should be the appropriate leader at a certain point. I think there's difference over the 11th Imam, essentially. And so they broke off. They ended up becoming their own kind of religious community and tradition, and established themselves in this region of Syria and southern Anatolia. And so that's very important to know that, as a result of the breakup of the Ottoman Empire and during the Mandate period, the League of Nations drew these lines, and the international community recognized, borders that weren't necessarily relevant to the peoples who were living there, and in one case divided the Arabic-speaking Alawi population, principally between the kind of governorate or emirate of or region of Iskenderun, which fell into the modern Republic of Turkey, and Syria, which was for a time period before there were important revolts against the French Mandate. Part of it was of what is kind of the coastal regions of Syria, in the northern western part of Syria, Latakia, and so forth, were inhabited by Arabic speakers, many of whom, if not the majority of whom, in this particular area were adherents of the Alawi orientation. And because sometimes they've been known as Nusayris in Sunni polemical literature, because they identified a figure, Ibn Nusayr, as the key exponent of this new sectarian orientation that had doctrines that were seen as going beyond Orthodox Sunni or even Orthodox, what becomes Orthodox Shi'i belief about the importance and significance spiritually and religiously of Ali, who is a figure revered by Muslims as a whole, or at least used to be, who is the nephew and son-in-law of Prophet Muhammad, right?
Second first Muslim.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. A very early member of the emerging new Muslim community when, after revelation was received in Mecca, the Prophet's wife, Khadija, radiallahu anha, was really the first, the first convert was a woman. His important, both his boss and his wife, let's remember, she was in fact actually, a very important independent merchant, and he had worked for her. They became married, and she was older than him. She was a wealthy person, an accomplished person, and obviously was somebody he turned to for guidance and support as well. And in fact, actually, I don't know why we're getting into this tangent, but it's just you've stimulated this historical excursus, which is important for us to understand, because so much polemic is said about him and about early Islam. But obviously, she was the first person to convert. And in fact, in that moment of disorienting encounter with the divine and the divine message, this for the first time, it was a very confusing, disturbing, experience. And according to our earliest historical sources that characterize this, the Prophet himself was kind of confused about, like, is he going mad? Is this real? What if I tell people about this? Will they think I'm a madman?
Is
they'll
this
disbelieve me? That's right. That's right. Is this like a genie, a jinn, kind of having a malign influence, spirits working on me? These thoughts come to, and it was his wife, Khadija, who said, no, this is true. You're not going insane. And she encouraged him. And that's what allowed him then to talk about it among close family and friends. so that his closest friend Abu Bakr, who became the first successor caliph in this tradition, and his cousin Ali were among the earliest then to join. So Ali is a very important figure, and frankly, it's important to recognize that he became a polarizing figure because of disputes early on in early Muslim history about what should happen in the early Muslim community after the death of the Prophet. So people who became what we call today Shi'is were partisans who supported Ali's position and status to be the leader of the Muslim community, both as a religious figure, that he had a special spiritual connection, as somebody who was close to the family, a member of the family of the Prophet, who'd married the Prophet's daughter, was part of the household, that he had, really seen Islam and received from the Prophet special guidance that others who were outside, even if they were close companions, had not had access to. And out of this, they believed that he had a religious guidance that was necessary or important for the community, and that he also, as a result of being an important warrior in the early periods of battles and so on, that helped establish the early Muslim polity, that he should be the leader of the Muslims. The most righteous should also be the leader. And this is what ends up becoming the Shi'i doctrine about the Imams, and they see Ali as this key important source for them, whereas there were others who didn't want to accept this, certainly not in the earliest period, and there were those who disputed his authority early on, that he had created a civil war, kind of a problem that we've seen happen, where Muslims started fighting over questions of who has religious authority, how should we be governed, how should we practice, and as a result, it led to, over the course of time, a sectarian division between Sunnism and Shi'ism that has meant different things at different times. And exploiting this early history and sectarian divisions and disputes over this history is also a ground on which we see a lot of information and polemics being circulated today. So I thought when I first read this that it was maybe targeting the Alawis as sort of heretical, if you want to put it in those contexts, as heretical community, that it was justified that Turkey would support and be involved in the overthrow, and that Bashar al-Assad was seen as maybe a Shah Isma'il type figure, as the leader of a branch of Islamic sectarian heresy that should be suppressed. So that was one reading I had of it as well.
I think it's both. And I've sent you later that, and I think you saw it before me as well, that from the other side, there was someone else, probably not as influential as this person, but sort of warning the others. We are the grandchildren of Shah Isma'il. It's like if we are to see two sides, then there's this sort of sentiment going back to Shah Isma'il from the other side as well. So it is definitely an interesting sort of convergence there somehow.
Well, I think you're right that there are probably those who see themselves broadly as going back to the righteous family of the Prophet from the earliest times and continuing to support them, and the demanding justice and restoration against the wrongs that were done to them. Of course, people should know who don't know that, one of the grandsons of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Hussein,
Ali's son.
Ali's son, exactly, who's acknowledged in most accounts as the third of the Shi'i Imams, after his brother Ali being the first and his older brother Hassan being the second, decided actually to contest leadership of the Muslim community and raised the banner of rebellion against the Umayyad dynasty, the Umayyad clan that had established, leadership of the Muslim empire at that time. It had become a kingdom or an empire that was, fairly large, ruled parts of, North Africa, at least Egypt and the Levant area and parts of what is today Iraq and Iran. But they had moved the capital to Damascus, and he was raising people to contest what was seen as the illegitimate and oppressive leadership and irreligious, in some ways, leadership of the son of a companion, Muawiyah, but a relative of the Umayyad dynasty. The Umayyad clan, which was a Qurayshi clan, from Mecca, and so they were, part of the tribe of the Quraysh, the people who had ruled Mecca or been the dominant community of Mecca. But many of whom had converted sort of late, weren't part of the Ali Abu Bakr group, early on, that had suffered with the Prophet.
Isn't he like the grandson of Abu Sufyan, the sort of the main antagonist?
I'm trying to remember. I mean, Muawiyah. I can't remember if Muawiyah was maybe a cousin of Abu Sufyan.
Maybe.
Anyway, there were members of this family had been opponents. In fact, actually, is what you're pointing
major
out.
Opponents.
Major opponents of the Prophet in the early attempt to preach the message of Islam. And so there probably were some bitter feelings that many of these people, one of whom was a close companion of Muhammad, Uthman, who became the third caliph, but many of his family members from this wealthy, prominent, important clan of Mecca, of the Quraysh, the Banu Umayyah, ended up having very prominent positions during his caliphate, his period of governance. And, on some sense, these were very capable people who were merchants, who were warriors. They'd had some administrative experience managing, a shrine community of Mecca and the caravan trade, and they had connections to Syria because of, commerce and so on. So they were, technical and capable people from a prominent tribe, but many of the more people of humble origins who had suffered with the Prophet and his community early on thought, these people have come and they are dominating and leading the Muslim community, when many of them were opponents and only recently came to this message. And do they have the best interests of the religion at heart? So there was like tension. There were critiques being made. And, one thing that happened is that it became a dynasty. It was past the early caliphate, had been members who had been prominent, important supporters of the Prophet, leaders within that community for decades. And
chosen with shura. I mean,
that's a very good point, with some consultation among the elders of the close companions to say who among us would be an appropriate caretaker and manager of Muslims' affairs. And it's not clear. Of course, there was a distinction between being the leader in a political sense of the Muslim community. They should be a pious Muslim, but it didn't mean necessarily that they had some special religious authority that would go beyond what had been already established in terms of the Quran, the scriptural revelation of Islam, and so on. And it hadn't gone from father to son. These had gone to other, members of that community. But after the death of Ali, when this one who was a companion, but from the Banu Umayyah, Muawiyah, established himself as caliph and moved the capital to Damascus, his son ended up inheriting his position and status. And so you have a change in the whole grammar and orientation of politics from a kind of charismatic religious community that had expanded. It had, become this kind of ruling, you might say, oligarchic community, but within its terms had been pretty egalitarian and democratic, except that they would, have somebody who would be their leader, turned into a dynastic kingship. And there were people who were not happy with that. There were people who contested it.
Sorry to intervene, but it's extremely ironic when you think about it, because one of the main arguments against Ali radiallahu anhu's caliphate was that he didn't become the caliph earlier on was that, okay, we don't want to turn this into a hereditary, a familial thing.
Great point.
But
Yes.
suddenly it's like, oh, now we have the
Somebody else
dynasty.
ended up
Exactly.
having the power to
Yeah.
pass it along generationally within the family rather than to whoever might seem to be the most appropriate or pious person to lead. That's an excellent point.
Thank you.
So
But
anyway,
just one more thing that I keep thinking about. Like, yes, Ali radiallahu anh was the nephew of the Prophet, but he was totally competent for that job. I mean, he's an extremely important figure. Just to be clear, that it's not just about, like, when people think about Shia or their faith, they shouldn't think about Ali radiallahu anh just as a person that has some hereditary familial connection. He was a very competent, very, very important figure.
Absolutely. I mean, he looms very large in the early accounts, and that's why there was so much loyalty that people adhered to his leadership and were willing to support him, even though there were powerful forces arrayed against him at that time. And I think the other, interesting point here I wanted to mention is that there are Alavis in Turkey, and very often they're mistaken for the Alawi community, Arabic speaking, principally in that part of Syria and southern Anatolia. And I think maybe even a lot of Turkish, commentators just associate the two together. Whereas in the Turkish tradition and Anatolian folk and religious history, Alevis were people who did, look to Ali and the spiritual and mystical teachings associated with him, whether you were Sunni or Shia. In fact, actually, the distinction really didn't always make that much sense. Many Sunnis, people who you would think of as Sunnis, always loved the family of the Prophet as well. This is just part of their spiritual tradition. In fact, all of the Sufi orders, okay, the mystical dimension of Islam, and the spiritual kind of traditions of the faith, all of the various Sufi orders that have developed distinctive practices and rituals and so on, and carry on, forms of chant and mystical music or poetry and so on. Look back to Ali as a source figure for transmitting the spiritual and mystical dimensions of Islam. They all, in their chains of transmission, highlight him as a source. So to be revering of Ali and respectful of his kind of importance and significance in Muslim history and tradition, religious knowledge and guidance should be across all these traditions. And those who had, maybe some somewhat heterodox kind of ideas and so on in Turkish, in the Anatolian landscape, very often, like the Bektashi Sufis, who were seen as a little bit more kind of radical, but were very important in spreading Islam in the Balkans and were closely associated, as you might say, almost the military chaplains of the Janissaries, were also sometimes called Alevis because they really were partisans of promoting the tradition of Ali's spiritual and mystical ideas. This provided, of course, a base, you might say, of support for Shah Isma'il. Okay, so getting back to the letter and to that history of Sultan Selim, Selim in that letter that you were reading, and you read a couple passages, really characterizes himself as a defender of Sunni orthodoxy, that he's listening to in the exact passage you read, listening to the judgment of the scholars. And of course, he's thinking these are basically Sunni scholars of Islamic law and theology who are supporting his political position for leadership over Shah Isma'il, who is being condemned because he is promoting as the sort of official religious tradition of his lands and domains, Imami Shi'ism, 12er Shi'ism. In fact, actually, not a lot of people know that Iran was not majority Shi'i. I mean, now we think of Iran as the heartland of Shi'ism, but it wasn't until the 16th century. That's just a few centuries ago. But he kind of he promoted and enforced. In fact, he actually put pressure on people that you should adopt the 12er Shi'ism, Imami Shi'ism, which is why those who are resisting what's happening in the rest of the region currently. You referenced that there was a video we saw on Twitter of somebody in a mosque, I believe it was in Ardabil, which is in Iran, near the Azerbaijan border, saying, we are sons of Shah Isma'il, we are in the tradition, we are the Qizilbash, we are his dedicated troops, because Shah Isma'il, had, in addition to promoting 12er Shi'ism, he had extremely devoted followers through the Sufi order that he was held to be the chief of, the chief sheikh or spiritual guide over. And his Turkic, he might have been a mix of Turco-Mongols, but Turkic tribes that basically used to rule most of the eastern part of Anatolia all the way through to Central Asia. There were different tribal groupings and confederations. He was sort of the head of a grouping of Turkic tribal leaders who had become adherents to his doctrines. And his doctrines, personally, quite interesting, because he was known for, some rather dramatic ideas about that definitely did go beyond what we would think of as, Sunni orthodoxy. In one poem, I recall, he wrote under a pen name called Khatai. And in one of them, he characterizes himself as the Zuhuri Kibriya, the manifestation of mystic cosmic greatness, the Sahib al-Kiran, the master of the auspicious astrological conjunction, the kind of Mahdi, the rightly guided Shi'i, or Imam that is awaited at the end of time as a kind of messianic, eschatological figure at the end of time. I mean, he even said, I'm the Alexander of this age. And, he even said in some ways, although I am a sinner, I am also a divine manifestation. I am, what did he say? More than just the shadow of God on earth, which, a lot of people claim to be that. Timur, Tamerlane claimed to be, the shadow of God on earth. Illallah. He said, I am a, hulul. I am a incarnation. I'm a manifestation. I'm a zuhur. And so there were some very radical, dedicated believers and followers in his circle. But, what's interesting is that, Ottoman circles were also kind of pretty, this idea that they were these ultra Sunni Orthodox defenders of the faith. Maybe that was the case in geopolitical distinction between them and the Safavids, that they could mobilize and marshal this kind of difference and condemn, Shah Ismail and the Persians for being heretical people. But in fact, actually, the Ottomans, Mehmet the Conqueror was, had all kinds of affiliations with some of these ghulat, or extreme kind of groups that were claiming Alavi type traditions and orientations as well. And the success of the Ottoman Empire relied so much upon promoting a kind of tolerant version of Islam in the Balkans, where it was mixed populations, mostly, obviously, historically Christian. Today we think of all of the Muslims in the Balkan regions as essentially Turks. They're not. They were people who converted to Islam through Sufism, in particular the Bektashi and the Halvati Jarrahi and these other different Sufi orders helped spread Islam in Balkan lands, in places like Albania, Bosnia, and so on. And even to today, if you visit those countries, you will see that their form and practice of Islam is somewhat different from other cultural locations around the Islamic world, and that Sufism and remembering the piety of the great Sufi figures who came to the Balkans, sometimes as warriors, poets, and Sufis all wrapped up together. And that heritage is still there. And that doesn't fit exactly into the image of Islam that the Salafist, takfiris are interested in either, right? So there is both sides of this. It's a very strange and interesting use of Sultan Selim to try and kind of provide a certain image of Ottoman history as always being dedicated to this Sunni orthodoxy. What he's really known for is using this as a way to kind of liquidate dissent within, the Ottoman imperial regime, and to promote a kind of sectarian division that allowed him to massacre many different groups in Anatolia, including any Shi'i or Alevi groups. And as I said, Alevi didn't necessarily mean Shi'i. It meant that they loved Ali and saw themselves or were identified as people who adhered to some of these mystical Sufi traditions and so forth. And so when we're talking about him, he's a very important symbol of sectarian violence, right, being enforced. And that's obviously one of the reasons why he's being quoted here. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I mean, as you said, it feels like he sort of used this as a political tool, and now his story is being used as a political tool.
Right.
Which is
right.
Unfortunate. By the way, just helping Sina, your producer, can you turn your camera a bit lower?
Oh yeah, okay.
He's gonna be exactly. I think yes.
Okay, or maybe sit up more.
yeah, that
yes,
will be better. But
yeah,
I have we all sit bad, so yeah. So I don't know how to continue from here, but
well, I think maybe talking a little bit more about what this sectarianism is doing today and its role. We alluded a little bit to it in terms of division. I mean, I see it, one, as justifying Turkey's intervention in Syria. Two, what you mentioned, which is organizing support in Turkey and geopolitically for confronting Iran. So one thing I would have wanted, and I mentioned that I wanted to ask you about, is how has the relationship to Iran been characterized over recent periods up to this point? I mean, this point involves definitely tensions because Iran was supportive of maintaining, Syria within this axis of resistance. And since Turkey decided to take this step, or the Turkish government decided to take this step of supporting, these Takfiri groups to topple the government, that obviously puts them on different sides of the issue. But I mean, what kinds of relationships have been, existing in this period, maybe in the last years? I thought there had been some rapprochement, some cooperation, collaboration.
Yeah, it's been a mixed bag. For people who know almost nothing about Turkey, Turkey has been governed by the same party, more or less, in the last 22 years, I think it's been. So it's been quite a continuous period, ideologically. And there has been rapprochements, especially when Iran was sanctioned heavily. Turkey, together with Brazil at the time with Lula, I think, did actually break those sanctions, helped Iran out, which created a nice rapprochement. And trade has been increased quite a lot, and it's still getting increased, which is a bit weird still. But anyways, apparently trade never stops.
The almighty lira.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, which we should go a bit into regarding Israel as well with Turkey. So with Al-Aqsa flood, uh, it's been obvious from the get-go that Turkey has been supporting supporting Israel uh, via the Azerbaijani oil that goes through the pipeline that goes from Turkey, and everyone knows that. Um, and they actually admitted that that's been happening, but they can't stop it because Turkey wants to be the sort of energy hub since it's on the crossroads. And I mean, that's more or less what they said. There's a lot of money to be made.
Well, and there are plans, of course, for building pipelines from, say, Qatar for natural gas through Syria,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We'll see if that happens or not, because security is a huge issue. So we'll see. But like, and Turkey has been, other than the oil, like, let's say, okay, oh, this is a strategic thing for us. We can't just leave it. Like, they could have said something like that, which they didn't. But they had the trade has been increasing with Israel. Steel, cement, food, just name it, and then it's there. So Turkey has been
Despite
a major.
some announcement that they were cutting those things off, apparently there are ways, send it to third parties, go to Cyprus, redirect the
Even
shipment.
worse, they changed the labels to Palestine. Yeah, I mean, it's that's that
You mean
terrible.
for goods that are coming back into Turkey from?
No, selling to
Oh,
Israel
selling.
by
Okay,
selling to
by selling to
Palestine.
Palestine. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, yeah.
It's been completely terrible, and I mean, they have been for the last 400 days. They have been saying like, "Oh no, we said that we're cutting it." So, but there was the other day there was this parliamentarian on a TV debate. He's like, "Yeah, the trade has been started before our government and our President Erdogan has said if it's necessary to be cut, it will be cut and whatever." And then the others are like 13,000 children dead. It's still not necessary. Like, apparently not. I mean, the weird thing is that people still think in Turkey this is the government propaganda, and people do believe it actually, that Turkey is the state that has done most for Palestine, which is, I mean, absurd. But people do believe it. It's unfortunately it's like that. But if we go back to the relation to Iran uh, and Syria, um, I think Turkey saw a chance to create, together with the Mursi government, when during the Arab Spring, when the Muslim Brotherhood took over in Egypt, uh, they saw a chance to create the so-called Sunni Crescent.
Yes.
And actually that led to, in part, led to the torpedoing of the Kurdish uh, peace process in Turkey, because both Turkey thought, okay, well, actually, we should uh, sort of help Syria to, or help Syria, help the rebels in Syria to create a more Sunni-backed government, a more Muslim Brotherhood-oriented government than the current Alewi one.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and the Kurds, on the other hand, thought, okay, actually, we have a chance now with this Arab Spring thing to create a zone of sort of a federative kind of independence, a small statelet there.
Right. Hence Rojava. Yes.
Exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
which is completely backed
Mm-hmm.
by the U.S. and Israel.
Yes. Yeah.
It wouldn't be able to do
Survive
anything.
without
No,
that. Yeah.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
So since then, Turkish Iranian relations have been soured, I'd say. Uh, but again, like, the trade continues still. I don't know. Money doesn't stop,
Yeah.
apparently.
Yeah. Well, but it's precisely because of that it seemed, and especially under uh, Iran's kind of close relationship and cooperation with China and Russia, joining of BRICS, the fact that the Astana process had actually developed some kind of working diplomatic relations to try and create some stability in the Syrian situation. In fact, actually, this whole thing was upending this Astana process. And this is why I think Iran sees it having been betrayed by the Turkish government, because they had all invested together in trying to at least stabilize the situation. And after it had become clear that the reinforcement that the Russians and Iran and Hezbollah had given to the Syrian government had meant that this attempt by other powers to promote the Takfiri militias and the other parts of the Syrian opposition, such as it was, had failed basically to really take over the country. So instead of it festering and continuing to produce massive numbers of refugees, instability, and so on, they decided to quarantine, and they'd agreed on this, on quarantining some of these groups like HTS and other affiliates in Idlib governorate. Which was a compromise. Syrian government would have wanted the whole thing back. But, in order to do that, then there would have been resistance from other groups who didn't want these people, just traveling freely somewhere else, but also they had their interest. So there had been a kind of diplomatic process. There had been increased cooperation. I mean, I myself was in Turkey last year, and I remember reports about meetings between foreign ministers and so on, and trade agreements. These are the kinds of things they always like to announce on, news broadcasts in the region, is like so-and-so met with so-and-so, and like they talked about mutual trade. And, who knows if anything's really been agreed upon or changed, but at least you had some kind of regional politics of trade and nation states kind of figuring out, well, we're going to have to live with each other, so let's come up with some program.
I think
here.
That's the key. Exactly. I mean, Turkey has, like, historically, from the end of the Ottoman era, Turkey had this balanced politics, always sort of trying to balance out its relations to both the West and the East. And Erdogan has been very good at that as well, most of the time. But I think what happened during the last year, or last 16 months, as you put it, I think they saw a chance again. They saw that, okay, now the US is backing Israel to the hilt.
And surely there was pressure on Turkey. Actually, there probably was. Hey, you're in NATO. You need to,
Sure, but I mean, I think I'm not entirely sure if this was like this last thing about Syria, this backstabbing. Actually, this is what it was.
Yes.
Of both Iran and Russia, I'd say, but especially Iran, and probably even China, actually, because like part of the people in Syria taking important roles now are the Uyghur separatists. I mean, whatever you think of them, like, it's irrelevant, because China will be angry about this. And
good luck in getting into BRICS now, Turkey.
Yeah, no,
this is a question.
Exactly. And I think they sort of use that to get more leverage from, because that's the thing. I mean, when I say balanced politics, it's also like crashing each side to each other to get the best out of each of them. But I think with the war, the genocidal war spreading to Lebanon, and to some certain extent creating a sense of defeat in the axis of resistance, at least externally, they saw a chance to say, okay, well, it looks like the US is winning, and they didn't get anything from Assad. Assad didn't want to talk with Turkey until Turkey sort of pulled back its troops. So they were like, okay, then let's just use this chance to really show Trump that is coming that we are his guy here. We can be the Shah of Iran time for the United States. I think that's how I read it, actually. And I believe that it's everything else now is gone. Like, Turkey cannot reasonably play the balanced politics game anymore. I don't think it will fool anyone. So, I mean,
They
as you
may
say,
have, yeah,
as
they
you
may
say,
have
it's
switched too many sides too many times.
yeah. I mean, now it's more or less only NATO. That's the feeling I have.
Well, that's very interesting because for so long it seemed that Turkey under, AKP and Erdogan's regime was pursuing some, after being shut out of Europe, let's be honest, like the original idea was let's do some liberalizing reforms, get rid of the death penalty, use the Turkish application for accession into the European Union as a way to demilitarize the control of the state and have actual civilian control. That then, of course, turned into, well, why don't we actually just dominate the, deep state once we've managed to, kind of get rid of the secularists' control over the state. Let's like actually put in our own people. But at least that was the start, was like, let's liberalize, let's try and do what's necessary in order to become part of Europe. And that was slammed shut, and we can talk a little bit. That's a whole other topic and issue of the abiding foundations of Islamophobia in what it means for these people to be Europe. To be Europe means we can't have Muslims in there. I think one of the president of the EU at the time, who happened to be a French diplomat, said like the idea of having a nation of 70 million, at the time Turkey's population was 70 million. This is because this is 2-3 decades ago, since he said it. The idea of having a Muslim country of 70 million in Europe is an impossibility. Like we can't even contemplate that. It's not something that could even be imagined. So as a result, they turned to, a Middle East kind of politics, a regional politics. Let's be a leader of the Middle East region and reposition ourselves. And that's, of course, when we see this Muslim Brotherhood oriented affiliation, Arab Spring. We can be the, senior partner in a series of governments. Qatar will provide the finance, will provide the sort of geopolitical and military kind of heft for, Sunni Islamist, mild Islamist, sort of quasi-democratic, Muslim capitalism, basically. Like we'll position ourselves appropriately in neoliberal economies, but with a, kind of somewhat Islamist orientation, and Turkey will be the senior partner in a regional kind of conclave or alliance of partners. That, of course, didn't really work out either, for various reasons. And now we're seeing push, going back and forth. And I think you're right that perhaps this time, that's why I said, it seems to me it's a choice not to, proceed down the path of regional orientation and a South-South BRICS alternative economic and geopolitical arrangement.
Yeah, I think that ship has sailed for a while, at least, with this government. I don't see it coming back for a while. And I mean, just to be clear, this government, as it's been in power for 22 years, and as you said, there has been different phases, and they had a lot of issues with the states because of their regional ambitions, and they, at some point, they did actually somehow take on Israel, especially. I mean, definitely not as Iran is doing, but
but there
did.
was the Mavi Marmara. There were like
Exactly.
actual concrete efforts to break the blockade and siege of Gaza
Exactly.
in the 2000s,
Exactly.
late
Yeah.
2000s, early
Yeah.
2010s.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that did cause a lot of problems in Turkey, or rather between Turkey and the United States. But I think after the last coup attempt, which was also probably CIA backed, but since then, Turkey's economy has been really terrible, and it's going worse and worse. For the last 4 decades, Turkey has been in this neoliberal era, and people. There are two aspects to this. I mean, people have been accustomed to luxury, or I'd say addicted to luxury. That's what neoliberalism in general does, the consumerism and all that. But at the same time, indebtedness in the society is skyrocketing. So it's become much more volatile. So a US sanctions regime combined with, I mean, maybe just a sanctions regime, but also Turkey has a lot of internal 100 years old festering issues. So a combination of the two would definitely topple any government right now. So I think that's why Turkey feels extremely vulnerable. So, and sort of taking a South-South collaboration path or a BRICS path would make it much easier for the United States. Or, I mean, that would sort of trigger a reaction from the United States to say, okay, you're done. So I think they thought, okay, they are winning anyways, so let's, and we don't want Iran to be the super boss. We want to be the super boss, so let's be the super boss. And Trump likes strong men, so
yeah, let's be a strong, strong ruler. I mean, it does suggest, he wants to be a Sultan Selim. Let's remember who Sultan Selim was, in addition to, as I said, having these hostile relations with Iran, as per the letter, to Shah Isma'il. They had a battle in 1516, decisively defeated. Maybe for the third time. I mean, he had been in other battles against Safavid forces, and Yavuz Selim had been victorious many times before, but a really decisive battle in 1516, the Battle of Chaldiran. It essentially opens up much of the Middle East. The Mamluk dynasty was quite weak, these rulers of Egypt and parts of the Levant. And after the Battle of Chaldiran, he proceeds to take control of what? Syria. I mean, Syria meaning this whole Sham region that includes what is today the separate countries produced as a result of colonialism and the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, of Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and the Zionist state of Israel. Like, this whole territory was really part of Sham. And then he also conquered Egypt. So by the end of his reign in 1520, the Ottomans had become a major ruler of the heartlands of Islam, rather than a sort of Anatolian polity with a focus and direction of the Balkans, right? Up to this point, most of the territories that were governed by the Ottomans were actually in what we think of as the continent of Europe. They were in the Balkans and the western part of Anatolia, coastal areas. This is what made the Ottomans real Muslim rulers in central Islamic lands. And perhaps there is being signaled by this journalist who's close to Erdogan's circle and is very pro his government, of saying, signaling these are Neo-Ottoman ambitions, and that we may have some proxies who we've supported and helped put into power, but the real power and the real kind of grand political design here is reconstituting some sense of Turkish hegemony in the Middle East region.
Yeah. Oh, and on that note, they just 2 days ago, I think, they did a huge demonstration, government sponsored, or the people close to government, the sort of business people organized this. And actually, the organization that the Mavi Marmara did join as well.
Oh, really?
In the organization, yeah. And the sort of slogan was first Hagia Sophia,
yes,
which under this government was turned back from its museum status to being a mosque. So originally,
great precedent for Al-Aqsa. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they are saying. They are saying, first we got Hagia Sophia, now we got Amaviya mosque in Sham,
in Damascus.
Damascus, exactly. Yeah. Next is Al-Quds. That's the slogan.
Yeah, that's the
that's the
slogan.
official slogan of this demonstration.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, because it does put Turkey essentially now has, or soon maybe will have, essentially a border with Israel. If Turkey's sort of actually directly ruled areas expand further into Syria, we don't know the future of Syria and Syria's governance. We do know that it has also been the opportunity for massive expansion by Israel of its occupation, not just of the territories it had already occupied since the 67 war in the Golan Heights, but further and beyond. And they're having incursions and, apparently appearing on the outskirts of Daraa, and in Quneitra, they've ejected, state bureaucrats from their offices, and they've seized the very important Mount Harman strategic location, the highest peak that overlooks Damascus in one direction and the other towards the border of Lebanon, which means that they can, when the ceasefire, so-called ceasefire in Lebanon is over, that's been violated nearly 1,000 times of Israeli bombardment, attack, incursion. In fact, actually, as the Ansarullah leader and spokesman at his last Thursday speech said that Israel has taken more territory during the ceasefire than it was able to do during the 6 weeks of attempted invasion and battle. And they now can approach from the east into the west from a different angle because they've taken territory in Syria towards the border with Lebanon. So ultimately, however, we don't know what is going to be Syria. It could be that Turkey will essentially have a border with Israel, and whether or not it is in the mind and the plans of Turkish government about the consequences of this. What we've seen is the ideology. I read an interesting article by Trita Parsi about Israel's kind of geopolitical strategy, which is not to accept any power that could be a rival in their region. It doesn't matter if they're allied or not, because their whole point is, look what happened in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution in Iran. They got rid of the Shah of Iran, who was a pillar of U.S. policy, pro-Western policy, pro-Israel completely. And that was reversed immediately with a popular revolution, because the danger for Israel is that there's no predictability right now. These corrupt, degenerate elites may be pro-West, pro-Israel, willing to cooperate, but that stands in variance with the people's wishes of the region and the interests of the region. And so it's an unstable situation that could be reversed. And as a result, their policy is it's much better to reduce the capabilities economically, industrially, militarily of any other states in groupings within the region, so that they could never rival or challenge Israeli hegemony. So the chaos, the weakness, the fragmentation that we're worried and concerned may continue in Syria with its division or its fragmentation, or at least it being reduced in such a capacity, actually serves their interests. They would not want a strong Turkish state, regardless of whether they're willing to do business with them or not, because that is long-term an unpredictable situation to have any strong powers. And that will bring conflict to Turkey, whether it wants it or not, whether it envisions it or not. So I think that's going to be an interesting challenge or problem that may have seen as a short-term opportunistic gain to seize territory, have a friendly, power in Syria, maybe repatriate some of the refugees, some of the millions of refugees that had come seeking asylum and in Turkey, because of course, and you could tell me more since you follow the Turkish news, but I noticed when I was there during the recent elections, how much anti-Arab, anti-Syrian racism was assumed on all sides
Yeah, it was
of
insane.
Turkish political discourse, not even just the far right gray wolves or, Erdogan's party trafficking in the liberal, coalition that was supposedly in opposition were also at the end saying things, anti-Arab racism,
Yeah. I mean,
and so on.
to be fair, the government side were the good guys on that topic,
Better
actually.
than any of the others.
Yeah,
That's right.
which is a pretty low bar.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it was really crazy. Especially there was like 2 rounds because the first round was undecisive, so it went to the second round with the top 2 tiers. And in that 14 days of interregnum, the entire campaign on both sides were about the immigrants and just, or not, sorry, the
Syrian
refugees
refugees.
rather
That's
than
right.
immigrants, exactly, and just completely shitting on them. So it was quite crazy. So yeah, I mean, I definitely see your point about Turkey potentially having a border with Israel and what that might do, and Trita Parsi's argument is also compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but personally and pessimistically, I don't have any hope from Turkey for a long while, unfortunately, because of the choices it made, and because of those choices, at least I see parallels in the society. Like this neoliberalism has corrupted the society in so many ways. I mean, and like if there was one thing that was sort of maybe, I don't know, stable in Turkey was the um, traditional Islamic understanding, maybe, or sort of masses of people sort of being behind that banner. Uh, I don't think even that stands now. Like if you really push Turkey to an economic chaos, which it already is in, like it's the inflation has been so terrible, and the lira has been plunging for the last, I don't know, 5 years. Um, so I don't, like, at least on the
The
short term.
earthquake didn't help either.
No, no,
Devastation. Yeah.
no, not. It
Yeah.
feels like until like a true catastrophe happens in Turkey, unfortunately, and things really get broken down, I don't see any short term hope from Turkey on changing its behavior against the empire. Uh, I don't know. That's unfortunately that's where I am about Turkey.
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem. I mean, we don't know what the future will be in terms of, Erdogan is quite old. There are lots of rumors about his poor health. What I noticed in the last round of elections is that there didn't seem to be an obvious popular succession within the party. Like, a lot of the people who may have been leaders within the party structure have been sort of purged. Abdullah Gül, I remember from years ago, these senior kinds of figures there, it's been coalesced really principally around Erdogan loyalists. And it'll be interesting. I did see, though, that in the recent municipal elections, the Belediye elections that had taken place, that the AKP didn't do so well. And part of it, of course, may have been longer term dissatisfaction and consequences in the aftermath of the major earthquake, the weakness of the economy and high inflation that you had mentioned. But I think one other component, and I'm wondering what you think about this, one other component was Islamist critique of the government's rhetoric but lack of action on Palestine. And I wondered if that could maybe explain, a fraction, that might have voted in the other coalition. Even some, when it's close like that, there can be 2 to 3 swing change means 5 or 6 percentage, from within your base coalition. And some of the other I forget the Refah, the new Refah party, right? That is an Islamist alternative. Actually, is the predecessor before the
Yeah,
AK
yeah,
party became a
exactly.
successful party, right? Erbakan's son. I'm forgetting his name.
Fatih.
Fatih. Okay, so Necmettin Erbakan's son, Fatih, is a leader of a kind of neo-Rafah party.
Yeah, but there is also the Saadet, which is also...
Oh, yes, right.
So Rafah had to close down, and then they had this Saadet as the actual following party. But
it
then
gets so confusing.
Yeah. But I mean, to cut it short on that topic, no, I don't think so. I think it was the economy, more or less.
Just the economy, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, corruption. Yeah, I mean, it's boundless corruption, really. Unfortunately, you have to know someone high up for anything. It's like it's getting to ridiculous proportions. So people are sick of that. But at the same time, there is no real alternative that is promising something truly better. Like the left, the sort of left in the sense of socialist left, there isn't. I mean, there's the Kurdish party, and with their sort of socialist allies. But other than the Kurdish question, they are unfortunately irrelevant. I mean, that has been successfully purged in Turkey. And before its resurgence and a reconciliation with the people who are traditional in their ways and faith and all that, because Turkish socialism has mostly been
ultra secularist. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. There has always been this Kemalist, secularist, or laicist element to it, which hindered its sort of growing in the society. That has to be fixed, otherwise it's not going to go anywhere. So we'll keep staying with the empire, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, and I think also that's the problem is that the opposition, for as I understand it, would be even more like whatever Washington tells us to do.
Yeah, that's what they're signaling.
That's right. I mean, so there's no real good alternatives in this circumstance. Yeah, absolutely.
But as you say, if push comes to shove and Israel actually goes bananas and attacks Turkey, that would change things. But that's sort of more or less the only way I can
Well, there's a lot of other steps that would have to take place, because you've got Iran that they first want to deal with, so this is a longer term kind of question for me. It seems that with the expansion of Turkish influence, if it sustains that, dominant role in Sham, region, there's going to be reaction from the Gulf. They're going to be, kind of looking to find ways to undermine it. They don't want to be under, there'll be the revival of Arab nationalist discourse, and we'll have a whole podcast about characterization of the Ottoman rule as colonialism, another sort of ridiculous characterization, it seems to me. And we could definitely be talking about that. I predict that is, I've already seen a lot of people talking about like, oh, how terrible it was, Turkish rule, Ottoman rule in the early, part of the last century, and how horrible and oppressive it was, and so on. So that is definitely a narrative that's available historically for some of the other actors in the region to express their discontent, not in the most productive way, I think, but we'll be seeing that, I think, also coming up. You've been very generous in your time. I know it's very late where you are, but I did want, before we conclude our discussion, to come back to the question a little bit of Syria, the sectarianism there, and also this question of how and why it has fragmented Palestinian solidarity, why this has and how this has proven successful. I do want to say that I think the sectarianization of politics has bedeviled this modern age ever since, especially. Of course, it was there in after the revolution, Iranian Revolution, obviously. created conditions then where other U.S. allies and conservative or reactionary Arab regimes in the region, responded and characterized it as a sectarian kind of question. However, I think it really ramped up with the Iraq invasion and the U.S. attempt to reorder and remake the Middle East, these fears of a Shi'i crescent and the counter attempts to create a Sunni crescent, as you said, created sectarianism as the metaphor and language of geopolitics in the region, much to the division and retardation of its pathways towards any form of sovereign development, And I had been very encouraged, as I'm sure you must have been, recently before the kind of latest round of imperial involvement post October 7th, with the fact that, say, for example, Saudi Arabia and Iran had come to some normalization of their own diplomatic relations, which is the first time, in decades, brokered by China, part clearly of what if there were accession conditions that you could never reach to enter Europe, the accession conditions in BRICS was don't have a situation where you're joining an economic cooperative alliance and you don't even have political and diplomatic relations with one another. You have to actually be able to talk to one another. And so that was a very positive step brokered by China that was that with the Astana process, I was thinking and hoping, hey, there are alternatives that are being developed for a pathway to sovereign development of this region, to have regional center the regional politics rather than alliances with the West or the US and so on. And that would have been, I think, something that would have inhibited, in some ways, the Abraham Accords as well. I'm looking now, what do you see as the real detriments that are being created by this culture of sectarianism that has re-inflamed, in particular, over the question of Syria?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what you said about the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, what I was so hopeful about post Al-Aqsa flood was, I think, what Sinwar, Martyr Sinwar and Nasrallah, I think that was like together they were like the new Saladin of our time.
Right.
And they actually,
you're getting into deep history again here.
But they held it for like 400 days before they were martyred. But I was also thinking, okay, if it works, it would be divine intervention. I mean, because the people, as we see, unfortunately, aren't ready. They haven't had I don't know, the intellectual or the theological, whatever background should be there. It isn't there. And it just unraveled after their passing, unfortunately. And the reason I am sort of harkening back to Saladin is that what I see now is very similar. At least I can't stop analogizing to the Crusader state and sort of the factionalism between the Muslim societies at the time, the leaders that sort of thought, oh, maybe we can actually join the Crusader state to crush this other opponent that is also a Muslim. But like, what are you doing? But that's what we are doing, and it's. I mean, Giuliani or Ahmed al-Shara, whatever we're supposed to call him now, in his most recent interview in Al Arabiya, openly said if their sort of intervention stopped a coming regional war that would start by Israel invading Syria, which would pull in Iran and Iraq, and then actually force Turkey to join Iran and Iraq to go against Israel. And he was putting this as something good. And that's what I like. That's the only way I can't picture myself in his place and think that, oh yeah, I should say this out loud so people understand. But I think what's happening there is that he thinks, and I think unfortunately it is reflected in a lot of people's minds, that actually Iran is worse, or like we should deal with Iran first, or something like that, which is insane. But I think we are there right now. So the online discourse, there are many people sort of saying things like, "Oh, Assad was worse than Netanyahu," or "Assad was worse than Israel," or whatever. I mean, so that's the way I see. Unfortunately, it is developing, and that's not good in any way, uh, and it will keep splitting us. But I don't know how to fix it.
Well, I mean, that's interesting. I guess you're right that it really requires having the most fantastical and hostile image and understanding of Iran as a state and its behavior in the region, and of the demonization and polarization, polemic against Shiism, from the kind of religious, cultural, theological level that you're willing to believe outlandish and outrageous things about Shiis. Um, that is at the root of, or at least what was possible to exploit in defining and justifying a geopolitical scenario that I think on the face of it, it seems very hard to explain why this would be a good thing. Like, you know, the unification of Turkey, Iraq, and Iran in confronting Israeli aggression against all of its neighbors would seem to me to be something that would be a hopeful vision of mobilizing across the region, you know, and beyond. I mean, I
I mean,
don't.
you could say that it could potentially be the only
The
thing that
only
could stop
solution.
Israel.
That's
And it's
right.
like, yeah, I've stopped this.
Well, that was very interesting that he was kind of suggesting that. I mean, I don't know if he's correct that, because look, I mean, Israel was bombarding Syria. I don't know if they had any plans as a result of the ceasefire to begin expanding territory in southern Syria from the Golan
Yeah,
Heights, the
yeah. I
occupied
mean,
Golan Heights.
I don't think it's relevant either. Like
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
or not he's telling the truth, but the
He's trying to sell this as like a benefit of what, like, our overthrow of the Assad regime. We had to do this, otherwise there would have been this wider regional war that would have brought Turkey, forced Turkey into, you know, confronting Israel
I think
with
also
Iran. And
he's also selling it as, oh, we brought peace to
mm-hmm,
the Gulf
mm-hmm,
region or whatever.
right,
So it's like
right.
peace while genocide. Like, what are you talking
Yeah,
about?
right. I think you're right because he is picking up on the threat, um, to the Gulf oil states and their oil fields that has been threatened by Iran if Israel should attack with any cooperation and collaboration by Gulf regimes, right? Yeah, so I think you're right that is, of course, he's trying to recruit support there. And of course, he's trying to get the sanctions lifted on Syria and saying that we've done a useful service on behalf of the empire. So please take the sanctions off and allow us to, you know, have BlackRock and, you know, other, you know, firms come and help us develop our economy by privatizing, which they've announced that they intend to do, to privatize government, yes, government companies, utilities, and so on. Of course, total disaster. And this is the other thing that so angers me about diasporic people who should know the empire, should know there is so much anger and dissatisfaction with neoliberal capitalism in your own society. Why are you so divorced from what's happening? This turn to the right is populist anger at neoliberal capitalist exploitation. And you are going to say, look at this wonderful thing. You know, these new leaders are going to be part of the neoliberal consensus. They're going to open up the economy, bring proper capitalism, and that the problems of Syria under the previous regimes, which go far back before the Assads, like these policies of state owned utilities, of guaranteeing minimal kind of institutional structures of support for the basis of life. This was before, you know, the Assad regime as well. Um, that the problem with Syria was that it wasn't opened up, to the ravages of corporate capitalism. I mean, this is just so angering to see people fail to recognize, quite apart from the ideological, quite apart from the sectarian kind of dimensions of the way people have framed this as a good thing, etc., or a bad thing, whatever, regardless of what you think about these takfiri groups, they are going to be economic de-developers of Syrian society. They are not going to be protecting the life and welfare of the vast majority of Syrian people. They're going to open it up for exploitation, certain groups, benefiting and profiting, but it's not going to be progressive for Syrian society, its economy, or its independent development. It's going to retard all of that, which was already crumbling. I mean, already under the Bashar al-Assad, there were so-called economic reforms that weakened, these social structures, these government institutions, and had enriched, certain groups of people, a different class of people who weren't just corrupt rulers, but now corrupt business people with their relationships with the rulers, doing business with the outside. And so it was already being hollowed out and undermined, but this is just an acceleration of that. And I don't see how anybody who has any sense of progressive left understanding could be celebrating the takeover of society, by groups like this who are promising not only that, it's okay, we'll normalize with Israel and all of that, but we also are planning to gut the state institutions and the basis of life and privatize everything in Syria.
Yeah, it's really mind-boggling. I mean, it's saddening and very, very annoying to see people this clueless or jumping on this atrocity porn. I don't know what else to call it actually, but it's like, oh, look at this dictator. It's like dangling keys on, and then people just, yeah, you're right. This is all great that he's gone. I mean, the exact same thing happened with Saddam. Like,
I know. What
it's
happened?
not
People don't even remember. It's because that was U.S. military did it.
directly doing it. Yeah,
Directly
exactly.
doing it. And instead they did it through, proxy groups that have been incubated, supported, trained, financed by U.S. and its allies in the region. I mean, how could people be so gullible?
I don't get it. I mean, I really don't get it. It, it's not people who are external to the struggle. That's the part that is annoying. People who have been actually working for a free Palestine for a long while. Palestinians as well. Like it has created factions within the Palestinians as well, and it's really sad to see. But I think there is also, unfortunately, it is also that's partially why I left the organization I was in, because I could see, okay, this is actually buried deeper into uh, the sectarianism that we have been talking about, and it's like there is this Muslim Brotherhood sort of. I think there should be several episodes done about that, because I want to also learn, like,
Yeah, yeah.
how has this been growing, and because if I understand correctly, there are multiple lanes and sort of different orientations, because Hamas also was part of Muslim Brotherhood, comes from that as well, but it was flexible enough to sort of see, okay, we need to ally with Iran. Like, I think that was Sinwar's wisdom in all of this. Uh, but since he's gone, it's like reset back to. I mean, I don't know about Hamas. I can say if this is Hamas itself, but like people have been sort of going back to, well, actually, Iran has done so many bad things in Syria, and of course there's a giant Palestinian diaspora in Syria as well. So I think that plays into it as well. So
There is that. I mean, I think a lot of that is very much exaggerated, of course, for polemical effect in this moment to try and justify the overthrow. And from my perspective, you don't need to justify the overthrow of the Assad regime. if you're going to do what's good for the Syrian people, for the people of that land, you're going to be in solidarity with your brothers and sisters in Palestine. You're not going to normalize. You're going to really recognize that the liberation of the region only comes from the decolonizing of Palestine and not the other way around. I think part of the problem is that this kind of analysis tends to think that you could find separate solutions for yourself in your particular corner of the region. If we just have a better regime, get rid of Saddam, and bring in our Ahmed Chalabis and these people. Well, now they have the Chalabis, and it's not even the secular sort of seeming Chalabi. They've got this like vicious, kind of takfiri extremist that's come in riding on top of basically, U.S., Israeli, Turkish, and Qatari support. After sanctions have completely devastated this society, a decade of, war and chaos, so this sort of miraculous sudden change has obviously been a decade and a half in the making. But if you think that serious problems, I'm not saying everything's going to be solved by this, but if you think serious, real problems are that it needs to be reconnected somehow with the neoliberal global economy, and that we need to, kind of normalize. And if we just normalize with Israel, we'll be left alone to be able to develop our economy and society, and we can be a Greece. They'll let us alone. We could be like Greece. We could be like, this fantasy, this idea, when they don't realize that actually the only pathway to solving the problems of the region is to be able to have sovereign development collectively together as a region. Doesn't mean you have to get rid of your nation states, but you have to cooperate in a certain way rather than be serving the hegemonic, interests of U.S. empire that is constantly finding ways to subvert these attempts at sovereign development through its settler colonial entity in the heart of this region, breaking it up and preventing its proper integration. And if Israel wanted to be a state among other states of the region, if it wanted to be a genuinely democratic rather than a Jewish supremacist and a Western supremacist kind of enclave, it could be integrated into that same region. They have a lot of technological and advantages and so on. They would still be a kind of lead, just like in South Africa. See, that's why the solutions, just like in South Africa, the whites who stayed, it's not like they suddenly became pauperized. There's still the elites, basically, because they had all these advantages that in the transition they were able to use those. But now it's in a society that is not technically organized around racial difference and apartheid. You could have that. But the point is that you have to decolonize Palestine in order to be able to solve the problems of the region. And for some reason, I think a lot of people who may be pro-Palestine, may identify with the injustices being done to Palestinians, don't have the larger analysis about empire and about, what the role of Israel is in the region, And without that, then it's possible to go along these deluded tracks of thinking that, and selfish tracks, frankly, that you can abandon solidarity and find a solution just for us. Just for us, we will have a solution within this. And that's just not the way it's going to work.
Yeah, no, I don't get the part where people think getting support from the US and Turkey. I mean, okay, let's say Israel supported these groups as well. It's well known, but
Absolutely.
let's put it aside, because people say, "Oh no, it's not proven, whatever." Okay, let's leave Israel aside. Like U.S., Turkey, we know, everyone knows that these groups in Syria have been supported and are still supported by U.S. and Turkey. How can you justify this? Like, how do you expect something good out of this? Like, I've seen people talk about, oh, look at Afghanistan, look at Taliban. The U.S. supported the Mujahideen, and then afterwards they turned on the U.S. But it's not the same thing. There was no Israel in proximity to Afghanistan. So US will never leave the region alone, pull out from the region until it's kicked out. That's the But people seem to think that this is, let's fix Syria first, as you say, like isolate. And but that's exactly what they want. That's what they did to Egypt. That's what they now have done to Syria. That's the whole point of Abraham Accords as well, like isolating and sort of making individual agreements with different countries, and then have no solidarity.
And that's what the purpose of this sectarianism is to promote, whether it's nationalism, that's one thing, of these nation state nationalisms, or it's going to be Arab nationalism versus Turkish, Neo-Ottomanism, or whether it's Shia Sunni. These are all tools used to divide people from human solidarity in their own genuine ultimate interests, and to make them think that their interest is in serving some other kind of orientation in which they identify themselves, rather than seeing as a region as a whole. It has to be freed from imperialism. It has to be freed from settler colonialism, or it will never be allowed to develop in a sovereign way on behalf of the interests of its people, rather than a corrupt elite that is installed or maintained and supported, as a result of their cosmopolitan connections, to the empire. So, there's so much more, of course, to talk about. You've been wonderful, Mehmet, to join me to bring this letter to our attention, to talk about this very important topic and issue of sectarianism and what it serves, and to also, indulge me in at least a little bit of medieval and pre-modern history to explain it. There'll be a lot more like this, listeners and watchers to the show, of talking about the use and abuse of history.